Welcome back to AI Dev Days, friends. So you just heard from our friend April, and now you're joined by Arun and myself. We are here to talk about how you can move to production with Microsoft Foundry. Arun will kick things off and he'll talk about some of the basics, more of a hello world of how to use Foundry models with a focus on Claude with the OpenAI APIs. That's a mouthful. And then I'll wrap things up with more of a production grade tour of, when you're using something like this in production with things like token-based authentication, here's what that would look like. And my focus instead of Claude will be on the OpenAI GPT models. So now that you know kind of what we're going to cover, let me briefly introduce who's here with you today. My name's Scott Addie, and I am a principal product manager on the Azure SDK team with a focus on the developer experience for our .NET customers. Also spend a fair amount of time looking at our identity offerings and figuring out how we can simplify things there. Arun, I'll toss it over to you to introduce yourself, and then we'll move into the presentation for today.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Arun Sekar, the principal product manager for AI SDK developer experiences. This includes all the OpenAI libraries, a lot of the integrations open source, as well as helping and supporting all the Foundry and core AI libraries that we have. Next slide, please, Scott. All right, so let's start with talking a little bit about the Microsoft Foundry. I'm sure you heard a lot about it during the streams. I won't bore you with too much detail, but really the main focus here for us is the focus is about considering this as a factory. So the idea here is Microsoft Foundry is a factory that helps you manufacture kind of real-world AI apps using the tools that you see on the left side, and also using APIs and libraries that you already know and love, right? And so what this does is it brings all the models, agents, tools, observability, etc., into one unified experience. Next slide, please, Scott. So what we want to do here specifically in this talk is really talk about the raw materials of your factory, right? For the AI apps and agent factory, we start with models, and models are the foundation or the brain of any agent. Next. The core purpose here with Microsoft Foundry models is to access more than 11,000 models. So you can effectively deploy these with confidence and kind of optimize them for the best performance. So what you can do is you can discover and evaluate all the models for your use cases from the model catalog, which I'll show you in a second, within your own tool like Visual Studio Code. And you can also kind of avoid model lock-in by integrating the models into your application code with a very popular API that you already know and love in your language of choice. Scott kind of did a little bit of spoiler of what that is, but no surprise. Next. It's basically the OpenAI Responses API. So it's obviously one of the most popular APIs that people use. And what we have done is invested a lot of time and energy to ensure that any developer can use all stable OpenAI SDKs across the top 5 languages. So they can use the libraries that you want. And the feature that we're talking about here is the ability to swap models and providers without needing to change your code, right? And so kind of future-proof your apps for the sort of agentic future by using the OpenAI Responses API. It's also supported, like if you think about OpenAI Responses, it's also supported in all of the latest, greatest models that we have, such as Meta and XAI-based models. But now we're going to talk about how it's supported with Anthropic's Claude models. Next. All right, so let me go through the sort of a quick demo and show you how this works. So I'm going to switch to demo now. Let me share my screen. All right, so let's just do a quick round of how do you go about adding these models. So the first thing you need to do is, as April was mentioning, you want to basically go and install the AI Toolkit for Visual Studio Code. And once you have this, you also get the kind of Microsoft Foundry extension as part of it. So what you would do is once you have this, you would go ahead and kind of go into the Microsoft Foundry extension. And like originally you would have had to kind of log in to your Azure account and all those good things, and to your have your relevant subscription. I think this has been shown before, so I'm not going to delve too much into it. But basically, once you have that, you will see one of the services here, which is Microsoft Foundry. And the Foundry extension basically lets you deep dive into what you can do with the Foundry, right? And once you have this, you can go ahead and create new projects if you want. I've already created one here. And the thing I want to show you here is how you can kind of browse the model catalog with this. So you can go ahead here. And basically, once you have the models that you care about, and as you can see, we have the latest, greatest sort of Claude Opus 4.5 model here. And you can also see a whole bunch of other models that you can kind of see from here. So what you would do here is basically, you can go ahead and say, okay, I want to use anything from Grok or anything from Meta, or like say Llama models and so on. In this case, what we are trying to do here is basically try and create a model from Microsoft Foundry. So when you add it from here, it'll just filter by the Microsoft Foundry hosted models because you're in the Foundry extension, and you'd see a whole bunch of Claude models here. So it's a very simple one-click setup. You just go ahead here, and it'll kind of fetch all the metadata about this model and what are the kind of capabilities that it has in order to sort of provide a deployment screen. And what this provides is the Foundry project. And this is a key thing here. You want to make sure that everything that you're deploying in this case is living in the context of the Microsoft Foundry. And then you also want to make note of the resource that you have here. So just the two things that you created already as you created when you went into Foundry would be a project and a resource, because you'll need that a bit later. And then you can deploy a model, and you can specify all the different sort of parameters. You can also do things like if it had multiple versions, you can specify which one. And also you can configure parameters like how many tokens per minute should you be using with this model. And this is important for you to control, because this defines the kind of how, like everything that you're talking about. The Claude by itself as hosted doesn't charge anything, but as you start using it, you want to know how much you want to sort of use in terms of tokens per minute. And then you would click the deploy the model Foundry, Microsoft Foundry. So I already have it here, so I'm not going to deploy it, but that sort of gives you a quick view of how you would go about deploying the model. Once you have the model, then you would basically go ahead and sort of, again, make note of the sort of target URI that you care about. Is basically it has a resource. And then what we have, as I showed you originally, is we have this sort of starter kit for you, which is called Claude with OpenAI Responses. There's the ak.ms link in the demo slide that was just shared. So what you get with this is basically a quick view of, sorry, I'm the wrong one. Let me just show this in preview just so you see it. So what you would basically see here is a quick readme of what you have, which is just a Claude model with OpenAI Responses API in Microsoft Foundry, right? Now, what this gives is a bunch of different like sort of code snippets to get you started really quickly. The one you have code in Java, you have code in Go, you have code in .NET, and different languages. Here, I'm just going to focus on the code in specifically for. Oops, sorry, I'm just creating. Let me just messed it up a little bit. All right. So what you see here is how would you go about accessing the Claude model from using OpenAI, which is kind of what we are trying to do here. So if you look at the imports here, all you're importing is the OpenAI model, and you're importing Azure Identity. And Scott is going to talk a lot more about Azure Identity. The idea here is you can access your like Claude model, which is in this case Claude Opus 4.5, which is basically what we defined in the model that we just deployed. And you can go ahead and specify the sort of base URL. And this is where, let me just start off the sort of deploy of this. So all you do, you can just say run this Python code to, again, we're using GitHub Copilot agent with the Opus 4.5 to deploy some Python code that uses that uses that basically calls the model, right? Now, as this is running, what I wanted to show you is the key thing you want to add here is the resource name, which will basically specify what is the resource that you want, which you just picked from the deployment of the model. And the other thing you want to specify here is the project name, right? The two fields that I originally showed. So once you have those, and then you can basically provide you're just passing in the token provider, so you're not storing any secrets. And then you go ahead and make the responses call. So the beauty of this is you're using a pure OpenAI library call. You're not seeing any other, you're not learning another new model providers calls. And then you go ahead and basically run the code. So that's a quick overview of, and if things work, it should give me an answer to the question, write a 1-sentence bedtime story about a unicorn. Let's hope it works. All right, here you go. So you got the response. So it's a pretty simple demo here that just shows you how to go about doing this. And then now we can go back to the slides that Scott is sharing. All right, so this is just a quick overview of what this does. You can go to ak.ms Claude with OpenAI responses to get access to this. And this will let you install like different OpenAI libraries that go ahead and access the Claude and Foundry model using the responses API. Next. And you can, of course, you can do the same exact thing with Azure OpenAI models, and in this case, we also have another starter kit for you, which is ak.ms/openai/start, which now lets you do the same thing. And in this case, we also deploy the whole infrastructure for you in Bicep. And so you can also use Azure Developer CLI, which is basically using the command azd up to deploy this starter kit and also deploy like any GPT-5 model that you want. And this gave you a quick sort of overview of everything that we have from a Foundry models perspective. And now we want to go back to sort of thinking in terms of, like, this is just sort of the prompts part of the show. And now let's switch back to sort of Scott Addie, who will show you how to use OpenAI Responses API in a real world AI app in production with the tool calling and all that cool stuff. Over to you, Scott.
Thanks, Arun. So you see a fancy chart here on the slide. The takeaway for you here is, instead of talking about Claude as Arun was, the focus here is on OpenAI's GPT models, GPT-5 in this particular example. So let's assume you're using some Azure Compute. Maybe it's Azure App Service, maybe it's container apps, maybe it's functions, but in this case, it's App Service. And we're passing an API key to the OpenAI library that's using the response client under the hood, and that's calling off to the REST API, the responses API that OpenAI owns. And that will, of course, as I mentioned, use this GPT-5 model, which then has the capability, thanks to the OpenAI library, to call into tools that are exposed by remote MCP servers. And we're actually going to see a demo of this. I'll move on and show you that right now, actually. So what you see here in my browser is this .NET 10 Blazor application that I've created. Now let's assume, if we go back to the security identity topic that Arun mentioned, I'll show you a very simple example here. So let's say we're using an OpenAI model up in Foundry. It's an Azure OpenAI model. GPT-5 Mini just happens to be what we're using in this particular case. I can send a very simple prompt off and get a response back. And there's nothing super exciting here, but once I show you that this works, I'm going to show you the security aspect behind this, the identity story. So we're using Entra ID here, which is super important for enterprise grade requirements. Now, if I go off into VS Code, I'll show you kind of how this was built. And so if I focus on this particular resource group that I have in Azure, you will see in this resource group, I have my app service that you just saw. That's where the web app was hosted. And I've got a user assigned managed identity assigned to that app service, which you see here. You can see the source, the app service, it's assigned to the app service. And in this case, I am accessing the Foundry resource where GPT-5 Mini has been deployed. I have, to satisfy the authorization piece of things, I've assigned an Azure RBAC role. And that is Cognitive Services OpenAI User. That role has been assigned to the user assigned managed identity so that I can access this Foundry resource. Now, the authentication piece of things, which comes before authorization, of course, that is all handled through, we use the Azure Identity Client Library, specifically the default Azure Credential API within there. And you'll see in my program CS file here on line 15 where I'm instantiating this default Azure Credential object, and I'm passing along to it the name of an environment variable. Well, that's important. The environment variable is called Azure Token Credentials. Up in my app service, I'm actually setting the value of this particular environment variable. And if I toggle the visibility here, you'll see that I have set that to managed identity credential. So what that will then do is it'll say, okay, default Azure credential can be short-circuited and attempt to use managed identity to facilitate the authentication piece. And because it's a user-assigned managed identity, I also require some sort of client ID to hint at which managed identity it is that I'm using. And that's what this Azure Client ID environment variable is set for. That contains that particular client ID. So that kind of shows you in a real quick whirlwind tour the identity story behind using something like this. Now I wanted to switch over to a different demo. And this is what you saw in my previous slide. It's using OpenAI GPT-5, as you see on the right here, with a couple of remote MCP servers. I'm using two distinct servers specifically. I'm using one from Stripe, huge Stripe fan, so I decided to incorporate it into here. I'm also using an open source, community-driven currency conversion MCP server. And you can see the list of tools that are registered here that those servers expose. I am allowing a total of 3 tools from the Stripe server and just one tool from the currency conversion server. I've actually filtered this list down very intentionally to reduce latency and overall cost. Now let me show you what this demo is actually doing. I can run a quick prompt like this, hey, generate a markdown table containing my active products for AI Dev Day. And if I send that along, what I would expect to see is, a nicely formatted, like 4-column markdown table containing the 2 products that I have configured in my Stripe dashboard. And now when that comes back, while that's running, let me just show you that this is not a smoke and mirrors demo. There are actually products configured. Should see these 2 come back. And when that comes back, hopefully, sure enough, we see the 2 products configured there. Now let me take this a step further. And, I know that, hey, one of these products, the VIP experience ticket for AI Dev Days, happens to cost $200 US. Maybe I want to pay in euros. What would 200 USD translates to or converts to in euros? We got a nice prompt that appears here. This is our opportunity to, be the human in the loop that approves or denies usage of that particular tool from the remote MCP server, much like the experience you would see in VS Code when you're using GitHub Copilot. We get a response that comes back and it has done the conversion for us. It says $200 US equals roughly 171 euros. Sounds great. Let's go ahead and let's convert that VIP ticket to euros and then create a payment link on the back end in Stripe. And now when I send this, I want to point out one particular thing, and that is the tools that are listed up here. You see this read-only hint. These are annotations on the MCP tools. And when you see read-only equals false, what that's telling you is that this is a mutating operation. On the back end, the MCP tool is actually going to modify something. In this case, create a payment link. I get the human in the loop approval mechanism again with this toast notification. I will click approve and it'll continue chugging along. And while that's doing that, I'll run another Stripe CLI command out here and show you that right now, it looks like it may have already created that payment link. There's the URL to it. If I go back, sure enough, it completed the operation, and you see that same URL here for the payment link. that it had created in my particular Stripe account. Now, if I hop back over to VS Code briefly and kind of show you how all of this is working, I've got a very specific class in here that I've created for this. And what you're seeing here is I'm just creating an OpenAI client. This is using the official OpenAI library, which you see on line 13. That's the package that represents it. And I am passing an API key to that client. This API key is stored in a key vault, which you may have noticed in my resources that are deployed. I have a key vault configured over here. And I'm using the responses API to handle all of this. Kind of the last major piece I wanted to show with this demo is that there's this mechanism there are public APIs rather in the OpenAI client library that allow you to register those tools that I showed you in the web app. And you can see here, I'm just instantiating an MCP tool object. I'm applying a label to it called Stripe. This is the actual endpoint for that server. And I'm right here filtering down the list of tools that are allowed to be used in my application, again, for latency reasons. Only 2. There are probably a couple of dozen I could have used there. Same situation here with the currency conversion server. I'm only allowing a single tool. The big difference between these two that I wanted to point out here is that the Stripe MCP server does require auth, and that's being handled on line 89 there with, or 88 rather, with the authorization token. You'll notice the currency conversion server does not require auth. In the real world, you're going to have to deal with auth, and so I wanted to just show you that in this example. Now I wanted to hop back over to the slides. All right, so those were a couple of really quick demos. And what you're seeing here is a aka.ms vanity URL. I've actually created a GitHub repo where you can try this out for yourself. If you have the Azure Developer CLI installed, you can run azd up, and the bicep infrastructure as code is there to provision all of these resources in your Azure subscription and deploy the code for you. All right, do give that a try. And that actually concludes our session. Before we go back to the studio, though, I wanted to just point out that both Arun and I would absolutely love to hear feedback. If you've used anything we've showed today or you have questions on how to get started, I've actually left our emails here, scaddie@microsoft.com or hand@microsoft.com. Please do reach out. We'd love to hear from you.